I'm Colin Rock in Partnership Development here at Black Health Matters, and we welcome you to another important health discussion during our Summer Health Summit here 2022. We're going to have a discussion now about genetic kidney disease, and one in particular called APOL1. APOL1 gene variants found only in individuals of recent African ancestry account for the majority of excess risk of multiple types of kidney disease. For a deep dive discussion on management and treatment options, please join me in welcoming nephrology specialist and vice president at Vertex Pharmaceuticals, Dr. Ogo Egbuna. Welcome, doctor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin, for the introductions. As mentioned, I'm a nephrologist and I've cared for patients with kidney disease for almost 20 years. And I also lead clinical drug development in kidney diseases here at Vertex. I want to say a special thanks to Black Health Matters for this important meeting. Vertex is a proud sponsor of this 2022 Summer Health Summit. It's also an honor to have the opportunity to be here today to talk about this really important topic. Vertex is a global biotech company that invests in scientific innovation to reimagine the way patients are treated for severe illnesses, such as cystic fibrosis, sickle cell disease, and certainly APOL1 mediated kidney disease. And to accomplish this, we aim to evaluate the underlying causes of disease in order to have a transformative effect, not just an incremental effect. And to this point, we're tirelessly focused on researching and discovering potential medicines that are aimed at the underlying cause of disease, such as APOL1 mediated kidney disease that I'll be talking about today. So I'll be talking about kidney disease and a particular kind of kidney disease that is quite prevalent in patients of African ancestry. And why is this topic so important? Well, I'll start by directing your attention to the figure on the left. The red line at the top represents the number of cases of kidney disease in people that identify as Black. And you can see that compared to other races, there's a substantially higher burden of kidney disease in people that identify as Black or African American. And this is compounded not only by the burden of disease, but you can see in the figure to the left that there's substantial cost that is associated with progressive kidney disease. And you can see that when you think about the out-of-pocket and healthcare system costs, for someone with CKD stage 3, for instance, using 2014 dollars, as much as $20,000 are spent. And by the time a patient advances all the way to end-stage kidney disease or kidney failure, as over $60,000 in individual and healthcare system costs are being spent. Over the last several years, the rationale or the reason for this disparity in the burden of kidney disease amongst those that identify as Black or African American has been attributed to a number of things. Access to healthcare, education, exercise, nutrition. But we do know now, within the last decade or so, that a substantial portion of this disparity is due to, has an inheritable or genetic basis. And that's what we'll be talking about a little bit today. So the story of this genetic or inheritable risk for kidney disease actually has an evolutionary background based on how we evolved as people over several thousands of years in sub-Saharan Africa to fight endemic and deadly diseases or infections such as trypanosomiasis that cause human African sickness. These trypanosomiasis is a parasite that causes sleeping sickness, and all human beings, regardless of your racial background, have a gene called the APOL1 gene. This APOL1 gene, its only known function is to actually protect against trypanosomal infection. And over millennia, these trypanosomes have evolved to become even more resistant to our natural defenses. Similar to what we're even observing with, emergence of resistant strains or variants of the COVID vaccine, of the COVID virus. And humans have also evolved along with the trypanosomes. So people would now evolve to develop variants of the APOL1 gene that would be more effective to protect against the resistant or more sturdy forms of trypanosomal infection. And what we've seen is that these variants have been helpful in fighting infection, but in 2010, there was some groundbreaking research that was done and published in the Science Journal that showed that people with the APOL1 risk variants also do have an increased risk of kidney disease, and that the mechanism by which kidney disease is caused in people with these APOL1 variants is very similar to the way that the APOL1 gene actually kills the trypanosome parasite. So as I mentioned on the previous slide, there's an evolutionary basis for what has now emerged as a driver for kidney disease amongst people of African ancestry. And on this slide to the left, you can see in the circles, you can see the relative frequency of the original wild type APOL1 in red, as well as the variants of APOL1 referred to as G1 and G2 in blue and green. And you can see that people of West Africa have a higher incidence or higher frequency of the G1 variants of the APOL1 gene, while people that live in Central, East, and South Africa have a higher frequency of the G2 variant. But regardless of what you have, you can see in the figure to the right that the wild type APOL1 protects against the ancestral form of the parasite, but G1, those that have the G1 variant, are able to protect themselves against the more resistant strains of the trypanosome parasite that exists in West Africa. And those with the G2 variant actually do have increased protection against resistant forms of the trypanosome that are found in East and Central and South Africa. Now, we think that much of this diversity, because each person inherits one APOL1 gene from mom and one APOL1 gene from dad, and we think that much of this diverse burden of kidney disease is attributable to the genetic variants of APOL1. It explains a lot. In some estimates, up to 70% of cases of non-diabetic kidney failure, but not all of the disparity that we see. And it's also estimated that 4 out of every 10 African Americans with end-stage kidney disease have 2 APOL1 variants. So in addition to an increased risk for kidney disease, the APOL1 variants, by their activity, actually accelerate the rate at which kidney disease progresses, regardless of the form or clinical presentation that of kidney disease that a patient may have. And I'll take your attention to the figure to the left here. It's a long word, focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, or FSGS. It's one of the forms of kidney disease that's actually quite common in African Americans. And you can see in the dark purple line in that figure, the rate at which patients with FSGS and 2 APOL1 genetic variants progress to kidney disease is far faster than those with either none or just one of those genetic variants. In fact, within 5 years, 50% of the patients with FSGS and 2-APOL1 genetic variants have lost their kidneys and advanced to kidney failure. And this compares to those in the broken light purple line, where it takes as much as 13 to 15 years for half of the patients to reach the same stage of end-stage kidney disease. When you also look to the figure to the right, you'll see hypertension-associated kidney disease. Quite common, again, amongst people of African ancestry or African Americans. And again, you can see that in the dark purple line, those with 2-APOL1 variants have a much faster rate of progression to kidney failure than those that have just one variant or no variants. So the question is, how is it that the APOL1 gene causes disease? Well, the way that the APOL1 gene and the APOL1 protein that's produced from the gene causes disease is very similar to the way that the APOL1 gene protects against trypanosomiasis. I'll start by saying that not all individuals with 2-APOL1 variants develop APOL1 mediated kidney disease, and only about 1 in 5 people with 2-APOL1 variants will actually develop kidney disease in their lifetime. But an important element to the development of this APOL1 mediated kidney disease is that an infectious or inflammatory event, an infection or inflammatory disease, triggers increased expression and activity of the APOL1 gene, almost mimicking the kind of event that happens when you have a trypanosomal infection. This increased expression and activity of the APOL1 protein, now, especially when it's expressed in the kidney, causes damage to the kidney and causes all the very rapid increased risk and very rapid progression of kidney disease, as I mentioned on the previous slide. And like I mentioned, only the variants of the APOL1 gene are known to cause APOL1 mediated kidney disease. So what are the presentations of APOL1 mediated kidney disease? Well, like I mentioned, we all have the APOL1 gene, and some of us, about 13% of the African American population actually have 2-APOL1 genetic variants. There are various manifestations of kidney disease, either as FSGS, as I mentioned in the previous slide, or hypertension-associated kidney disease, or even lupus nephritis or HIV nephropathy. But regardless of the presentation, if you have 2-APOL1 genetic variants, it makes a very big difference in terms of how quickly you progress, even on the current standard of care, which is not effective because it doesn't get to the underlying cause of what's driving the disease, being the toxic gain of function of the APOL1 gene. I mentioned that the APOL1 gene damages the kidney cells in very much the same way that it kills the trypanosome parasite. And what happens is that the APOL1 gene is translated into a protein that is expressed in very important cells in the kidney called the podocyte that are responsible for the filtration activity of the kidney. And when there is increased activity and expression of APOL1 variants in the kidney, these proteins poke holes in the podocytes and the filtration units of the kidney, very much like it would the parasite. This leads to a leak of protein into the urine, because usually there shouldn't be any protein in the urine. And in addition, there's an inflammatory response due to these holes being poked in the important filtration units of the kidney, leading to a decrease in kidney function. So this is how the APOL1 variants that are associated with an evolutionary advantage to protect against trypanosomal infection actually are associated with, on the other hand, an increased risk and progression for kidney disease. The question is, how does one know that one has APOL1 mediated kidney disease, or any kidney disease for that matter? Well, APOL1 mediated kidney disease, like any kidney disease in the early stages, may not have any signs or symptoms. But when more advanced, what's more commonly observed is that there's a lot of fatigue, swelling, maybe swelling of the legs or even around the eyes may become an important feature of what patients with kidney disease may have. Weight gain, and then dark or foamy urine are some of the signs and symptoms, in addition to difficult to control blood pressure. So what are the ways to determine or identify that one has kidney disease in general, or APOL1 mediated kidney disease in particular? Well, there are a number of tests that can be done. The blood tests are important for the measurement of the level of kidney function that one may have. The urine tests are used to check for proteinuria, and as I mentioned a few moments ago, the presence of protein is an important indicator of damage to the filtration units of the kidney. And actually, the leak of protein can proceed by many years sometimes before there's an actual decline of kidney function. So, being able to check for proteinuria as an early indicator of damage is important. For APOL1 mediated kidney disease in particular, genotyping is required so as to identify whether one has APOL1 risk variants. And sometimes a biopsy or ultrasound or other blood tests might be necessary. So in conclusion, I'll say that there are many causes of kidney disease, as I had mentioned, and that the genetic variants emerged in people of recent African ancestry as a survival advantage, but it does carry an increased burden and increased risk of kidney disease. The early to middle stages of kidney disease may not have any signs or symptoms, except when it's really advanced. But simple tests can help to identify evidence of kidney disease, and genetic testing can help identify the presence of a potential genetic cause of disease and inform best options for treatment or management. As I mentioned, this is a genetic or inherited form of disease, so it's really important that you not only know your family history for kidney disease, but any other risks for kidney disease, such as high blood pressure, diabetes. So with that, I've come to the end of my presentation, and I'd be happy to take any questions that the audience may have. Thank you. All right, so I see a number of questions here. The first is, and I'll take them in order in which they came. The first is, what are the factors that preclude the parasite being more prominent in Western Africa? Well, it's very similar to the presence of, say, malaria in certain parts of the world. The climate very much drives, the climate and the environment certainly do, more humid environments, and the climate certainly does explain the presence of certain diseases being endemic in certain parts of the world. Another question is, how can one be tested to determine if they have the gene? Well, like I mentioned, it's a simple test. I've actually been tested, and I do have one of the genetic variants. Family members of mine do have 2 APOL1 variants, and they are at increased risk of disease. And it could be a simple blood test, or a cheek swab, or saliva collection, and the testing can be done on that. I have a question here from C. Brock that says, as a nephrologist, what are my thoughts regarding the increased disparity for kidney disease amongst Black patients? And in response to that, my thought is that there are several things that drive the disparity. As I said, disparities in income, institutionalized racism in the healthcare system, housing, so many things. But there certainly is, based on the evidence that I just spoke to a few moments ago, a genetic cause. And it's important that we also, in addition to all the other things that cause disparity in healthcare, address or try to find specific effective treatments for genetic causes of disease, because it doesn't matter how much we improve access to care or education or nutrition, if those genetic drivers do not have specific treatments, the burden will still exist. From Teresa, we have a question here that says, thanks so much for the information. My late husband was a renal patient. Now I'm pursuing a social work degree and want to work in the dialysis unit, helping families with renal failure. And to that, I'll say thank you. I'm sorry to hear about your husband. It is possible, perhaps, that he had APOL1 mediated kidney disease. It's why we at Vertex are really working with urgency and with a lot of excitement too, because we think that finding a treatment for the underlying cause of disease for those that have APOL1 mediated kidney disease will help in alleviating a lot of the burden, because the current treatment for blood pressure or immunosuppression just does not work for those that have APOL1 mediated kidney disease. I see a really interesting question here about how do I talk to my doctor about getting tested? It's an important question because patients have to be their own best advocates, and I know that sometimes patients might be shy or timid about asking their doctors about things that the doctor doesn't raise themselves. And I think the simplest way to address this is just break the ice. Say, hey, have you heard about the APOL1 gene? I hear it's an increase. It's a cause of kidney disease. It increases the risk for disease. It increases rapidity, and that the current treatments don't seem to work in patients that have such genetic variants. What can I be tested for? It's a simple conversation of that, especially if you have family members. And if your doctor hasn't heard of it yet or is not sure of what to do, you keep on looking for a doctor that might be able to. I see a question here on what is the relationship of kidney disease and hypertension. Well, the kidney is a very important organ, and in addition to getting rid of waste products, it also controls blood pressure. It also provides signals to the bone to produce red blood cells, and when there's kidney disease, you can get really tired. So whenever there's kidney disease, not only do you get tired, but the control or regulation of blood pressure becomes even more difficult. And in addition to high blood pressure causing kidney disease can worsen blood pressure. I have a question here about the best way to improve kidney function. Well, the best way to improve kidney function is to find out what exactly the cause of kidney dysfunction is in the first place. If you don't have kidney disease, there's nothing to worry about, right? But the only way to be sure that you do not have kidney disease is by getting tested, especially if there's a family history or you have any other medical conditions like high blood pressure or diabetes. Of course, eating healthy, exercise, maintaining a good weight, if you can, are important elements to making sure that your kidneys are healthy. I have an important question here about how are treatments for persons with APOL1 different from other causes of kidney disease? A lot of the treatments for kidney disease are similar regardless of the cause. And that's one of the things that the scientific and research community are trying to get a better handle of. That instead of treating all kidney diseases as with blood pressure lowering drugs or with immunosuppression, that we find the specific cause and target treatments to address that particular cause. Right now, there's no effective treatment for APOL1 mediated kidney disease. So the treatments for this APOL1 mediated kidney disease are primarily around blood pressure. And in some cases, some patients might be treated with immunosuppressants, but that's not as effective as we really would like it to be. And you could see, based on the progression charts that I showed in a few slides ago, that even on the current standard of care, the best available standard of care, patients with APOL1 mediated kidney disease still progress. Now, there are trials that Vertex and other companies are doing right now to evaluate potential therapies that could be effective in treating patients with APOL1 mediated kidney disease. But those treatments are being tested in the context of clinical trials. You wouldn't be able to ask your doctor to write a prescription for that, but you could potentially ask your doctor to participate in the trials. What I see a question here about the importance of genetic testing. What is involved in that process? Well, the importance of genetic testing, I think I referred to just a few moments ago, because if you have APOL1 mediated kidney disease or any other genetic cause of kidney disease for that matter, if you do not have a treatment that's specifically suited for that particular kind of genetic disease, you will not get the treatment response that one would hope for. So that's the importance of getting genetically tested. Because ever since the human genome was sequenced, our knowledge base grows by the day about diseases that were once attributed to either we don't know the reason, or maybe attributed to blood pressure or diet. We now know that there's a different reason for it. So that's the reason why for a lot of diseases, including kidney diseases, especially if it runs in the family, that why patients should consider getting tested for genetic variants or mutations such as the APOL1 gene. There's a question here about, can leukemia be connected to dialysis? And the answer to that is leukemia doesn't cause, leukemia can be a cause of kidney dysfunction. And depending on how aggressive, where the leukemia has spread to, it may involve the kidneys and lead to kidney failure. I see a question here about where can I get more information about APOL1 mediated kidney disease? Well, there are lots of, I think there are a couple of resources online. You could visit the Vertex website. That certainly gives some information about clinical trials, about the disease. NephCure is an important patient advocacy group. The American Kidney Fund, the National Kidney Foundation, they all have information in one form or the other about APOL1 mediated kidney disease and what's happening there in terms of treatments that are under investigation in the form of trials. I see a question here about, can dialysis or end-stage kidney disease be prolonged for a patient who has APOL1 mediated kidney disease? Well, I mean, by paying attention, getting your blood pressure under control, and eating as healthy as you can, getting frequent checkups, you could perhaps delay it a little bit. But again, these are approaches that have been used for decades and have not been effective. And as I showed in a few slides previously, the rate of progression to end-stage kidney disease is still pretty rapid. If one finds out that one has APOL1 mediated kidney disease, of course, having frequent visits to the doctor and controlling blood pressure and so on would help, but it's not going to stop what is often observed to be very aggressive progression. And then I see one last question here about how do I talk to my doctor about getting tested? So I think there was a similar question to this, and really just ask, say I've heard about the APOL1 gene and variants, and can I be tested to find out if that might be playing a role in kidney disease that I or a loved one may have? So I think I may have answered all the questions that have come up. I don't know if there are any more, but again, thank you all for your attention. I think this is a great time for science and for us to really drill down on the things that matter to patients of African ancestry. Thank you.